You know, in our kitchens, on our tables, it just sits there, silently. It's so common, we barely even notice it. But what if I told you its story is one of empires and explorers, of unimaginable wealth, and, yeah, some pretty unspeakable brutality? This is the story of how a tiny, dried berry became known as black gold, a treasure that literally drove nations to war, redrew the map of the world, and shaped the very planet we live on today. I mean, really think about it for a second. That simple act of shaking a little pepper onto your food, for us, it's nothing, right? But for centuries, that exact same gesture was a display of incredible power. It was a statement of wealth that most people could never even dream of. Because that's exactly what it was. This ordinary spice, it was once worth more than gold itself. It was a real engine of history, and it left a trail of ambition, money, and blood in its wake. So how on earth did something so small become one of the most powerful commodities on the planet? Okay, so to understand how it got so incredibly valuable, our story has to start on the lush Malabar coast of southwestern India. For centuries, this was pretty much the only known place on Earth where the pepper vine actually grew. But the secret of the Malabar coast was about to get out, and it would change everything. The ancient world became absolutely obsessed with it. We have records of it being used in Indian cooking as far back as 2000 BCE. Then, centuries later, and this is wild, peppercorns were found stuffed in the nostrils of the mummified pharaoh Ramses II as a testament to its power. By the time it got to Rome, it was the ultimate status symbol, even being demanded as part of the city's ransom in 408 CE. You can almost hear the frustration, right? 2,000 years ago, you've got this guy, Pliny the Elder, complaining that so much Roman gold and silver was flowing east that it was creating a genuine economic problem for the empire, all just to satisfy this insatiable appetite for pepper. And if you need one thing to illustrate just how valuable it was, this is it. In 408 CE, when Alaric, king of the Visigoths, surrounded the city of Rome, his terms for ransom weren't just gold and silver. Nope, he demanded a staggering 3,000 pounds of black pepper. It wasn't just a spice anymore. It was currency, as stable and as desirable as any precious metal. So after the fall of Rome, Europe enters the Dark Ages, but that craving for pepper, it only got more intense. With the old trade routes completely shuttered, the supply chain was seized by a new power, one that would go on to create one of the most profitable monopolies in all of history. For hundreds of years, the pepper trade fell under this crushing two-part monopoly. First, you had Arab merchants controlling the entire first leg of the journey from India. And to protect their sources, they spun these wild tales of dragons and monsters guarding the pepper forest just to scare off any potential rivals. Then, from the Middle East, a new power rose up to dominate that final crucial leg of the journey: Venice. The Venetian Republic became fabulously wealthy by being Europe's one and only distributor. This created this incredible bottleneck, which kept prices astronomically high and made Venice, by far, the richest city in Europe. And the scale of that monopoly is just staggering to think about. The Venetians would buy pepper from Arab traders in the East, and by the time they sold it in Europe, they'd slapped on this obscene markup, sometimes multiplying the original price by more than 20 times. This made pepper just unimaginably expensive. I mean, people were paying their rent in pepper, dowries were being settled with it, you had guards at the ports whose whole job was to frisk dock workers for stolen peppercorns. Just being able to sprinkle pepper on your food was a public declaration that you were incredibly wealthy. So for the rest of Europe, this whole situation was, well, infuriating. They were trapped, paying a fortune to Venice for a spice they just couldn't live without, and that frustration planted the seed of a revolutionary idea. What if? What if there was another way to get to India? And let's be clear, this wasn't just about finding new lands for the sake of it. This was basically corporate espionage on a global scale. The mission was simple: break the Venetian Arab monopoly, go straight to the source, and claim all the riches of the East for yourself. The nation that could pull us off would completely shift the balance of world power. Portugal took the lead on this. For decades, they painstakingly charted the African coast, pushing further and further south with each incredibly dangerous voyage. Finally, in 1488, Bartolomeu Diaz managed to round the Cape of Good Hope. And then, 10 years later, Vasco da Gama did what everyone thought was impossible. He sailed all the way across the Indian Ocean and landed directly on the Malabar coast. He had reached the source. Da Gama's return to Lisbon caused a tidal wave. I mean, when his ships arrived, loaded down with spices he'd bought for just a tiny fraction of the Venetian price, the world's economic center of gravity shifted, literally overnight. The Venetian monopoly was shattered. Lisbon was the new spice capital. But this discovery, it was about to get very, very bloody. Yeah, see, Portugal's breakthrough didn't lead to some new era of peaceful trade. It unleashed a wave of violent, brutal competition. The 16th and 17th centuries were defined by this global struggle for control of the spice trade. The Portuguese immediately set up a new, brutal monopoly of their own, using something called the cartaz system. This was basically a naval license to sail. Any local trading ship found in the Indian Ocean without this Portuguese-issued pass was considered fair game. Its cargo would be seized and its crew attacked or enslaved. It was basically a protection racket on the high seas. And this was the start of a whole new era. This wasn't a friendly trade rivalry. This was just straight-up warfare. First the Portuguese, then the Dutch, and finally the English engaged in piracy and the brutal subjugation of local populations. The quest for spices had exploded into a global conflict that fueled the engine of colonialism. And to really understand the shocking level of violence, we just need to look at what the Dutch did to secure their monopoly on another spice, nutmeg. See, nutmeg only grew on these tiny little Banda Islands, and the Dutch were determined to control it no matter what the cost. What happened next is now known as the Banda Genocide. In 1621, the Dutch East India Company systematically massacred, enslaved, or drove out the entire native population. The number of inhabitants plummeted from around 15,000 to just 1,000 people. The islands were almost completely depopulated, a horrific human cost, all for the European spice craze. So how did this spice, a spice worth fighting and dying for, become the cheap, everyday item we know today? Well, ironically, the very competition that the Europeans had unleashed would ultimately be the cause of its downfall, toppling pepper from its throne for good. All of this fierce competition triggered a steady, irreversible fall in price. The constant conflict, combined with bigger and faster ships, meant more and more pepper was flooding into Europe. But the biggest factor of all was that Europeans started planting pepper in their own new colonies, from Indonesia to Malaysia and beyond. The Malabar Coast's ancient monopoly was broken forever. And as the supply exploded, the price just plummeted. And today, the world's largest producer of pepper isn't even India, it's Vietnam. The vine has traveled the globe, completing its long journey from a priceless treasure to just an everyday seasoning. Its democratization was complete. So the next time you reach for the pepper shaker, just take a second. Don't see it as just a condiment, but as a relic of a forgotten age. In your hands, you're holding the legacy of fallen empires, the dreams of fearless explorers, and the catalyst for a global revolution. You're literally holding a piece of history itself.